The conference room aboard the Horizon's Edge felt smaller than usual as Commander Jacob Martinez stared at the holographic display floating above the table. The numbers told a story that made his jaw tighten with barely contained anger. 15 years of service to the Galacxy Council, and this was how humanity was repaid. Linda Hayes sat to his right, her fingers drumming quietly against her datapad as she reviewed the same information. Peter Graham stood near the viewport, arms crossed, watching the massive council station rotate slowly against the backdrop of Valara, Prime's purple atmosphere. The message had arrived 3 hours ago from Earth. The council had voted to strip humanity of all mining rights in the Kepler expanse. 200 alien species had cast their votes, and humanity's voice had been drowned out like always. The Kepler expanse was discovered by human survey teams 5 years ago. Human engineers had mapped every asteroid and cataloged every resource. Human workers had built the initial extraction platforms. Now the council claimed it all belonged to the collective good of the galaxy. Jacob had seen this pattern before. When humans developed improved fusion reactors, the council demanded the technology be shared freely, while other species kept their innovations locked behind patents and trade agreements. When human colonies needed protection from pirates, the council fleet was always too busy to respond. But when the council needed soldiers for peacekeeping missions in dangerous sectors, human marines were always first in line. The relationship was built on a foundation of exploitation dressed up in diplomatic language. Linda finally broke the silence. Her voice was calm, but Jacob could hear the edge underneath. She had spent 10 years trying to make the council partnership work, and every year brought fresh disappointments. The trade agreements favored the older species. The expansion permits were denied without explanation. The technology sharing requirements only seemed to flow in one direction. She looked up from her datapad and met Jacob's eyes. The question hung in the air between them without needing words. Peter turned from the viewport and spoke what they were all thinking. The council treated humans like children who needed constant supervision and correction. Earth had brought new ideas and energy to the galaxy, but instead of appreciation, there was only suspicion and control. He had watched human security teams protect council officials who openly mocked them. He had seen human medical teams save alien lives only to be denied basic supplies when humans needed help. The system was broken, and it could not be fixed from within. The next morning, Jacob received a summons to appear before the full council assembly. The message was marked urgent and carried the seal of Council Security Director Jathik. That was never a good sign. Jathik was a towering figure from a species that resembled nothing so much as a praying mantis, built to human scale. His transparent wings occasionally buzzed when he was agitated, and his multifaceted eyes missed nothing. He had made no secret of his contempt for humanity since the day Earth joined the council. The council chamber was an architectural marvel designed to impress and intimidate. 200 species had representatives seated in a vast circular arrangement, rising up in tiers around a central platform. The ceiling arched high overhead, covered in bioluminescent patterns that shifted with the mood of the assembly. Jacob walked to the central platform with Linda and Peter flanking him. The attention of countless alien eyes focused on them as they took their positions. Jathik's voice echoed through the chamber without need for amplification. His species had evolved natural acoustics that carried sound with perfect clarity. He spoke of temporal stability and galactic security. He mentioned quantum drive technology and its potential dangers. Then he made his demand clear. Earth would turn over all research and development related to quantum drives. The Council would determine if and when such technology could be safely deployed. Failure to comply would result in immediate sanctions and possible expulsion from protected trade routes. Jacob listened with growing disbelief. Quantum drives were human innovation from start to finish. Earth scientists had spent decades developing the mathematics. Human engineers had built the prototypes. Human test pilots had risked their lives proving the concept worked. Now the Council wanted it handed over like a toy taken from a misbehaving child. The hypocrisy was stunning, considering that at least 15 Council species used technologies they refused to share. The chamber waited for Earth's response. Jacob could feel the weight of expectation pressing down. This was supposed to be the moment when humanity bowed its head and accepted the Council's wisdom. He thought about the miners who would lose their livelihoods in the Kepler expanse. He thought about the colonies struggling without adequate support. He thought about the human crews who died protecting Council interests while Council fleets looked the other way. when humans needed help. Something crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. Jacob's voice was quiet when he began speaking, but it carried to every corner of the vast chamber. He thanked the council for 15 years of association. He acknowledged the opportunities for cultural exchange and scientific cooperation. Then he laid out the reality that everyone knew, but nobody wanted to admit. Earth had given far more than it had received. Human innovation had improved lives across the galaxy, but humans were still treated as second-class members. The mining rights, the trade restrictions, the technology demands, all of it pointed to a fundamental lack of respect. The chamber began to buzz with conversation as species conferred with each other. Jothic's wings fluttered in what Jacob had learned was a sign of agitation. Chancellor Vormak, an elderly reptilian who led the council, raised a clawed hand for silence. His voice was measured and diplomatic. Perhaps Earth needed time to reconsider. Perhaps there was room for negotiation on certain points. The council valued human contributions and wanted to find a path forward. Jacob shook his head slowly. There was no anger in his expression, only a kind of sad finality. Humanity had tried the path of negotiation for 15 years. Every compromise had led to new demands. Every concession had been met with fresh restrictions. Earth did not crawl up from its gravity well and survive countless struggles to be treated as a subordinate race. Humanity withdrew from the Galaxy Council effective immediately. All human personnel, assets, and claims would be removed from council space within 90 days. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted questions and protests. Jothic demanded Jacob reconsider such a reckless decision. Vormak called for calm and restraint, but Jacob was already walking toward the exit with Linda and Peter beside him. They removed their council credentials and placed them on a table near the door. The symbolic gesture was not lost on anyone watching. Earth had made its choice. Within an hour, the news spread across the galaxy at the speed of quantum communications. On Earth, President Claire Bennett called an emergency session of the Planetary Congress. Admiral Kate Sullivan began issuing orders to the defense fleet. Colonial governors started preparing evacuation plans. The bureaucratic machinery of human civilization shifted into a new configuration with surprising speed. Every human outpost received the same message. Operation Homebound was now active. Jacob stood in his quarters aboard the horizon's edge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, 30 light-years away, but somehow feeling closer than it had in years. He did not know what the future would bring. War was possible. Economic hardship was likely. But humanity would face it on their own terms with dignity and tact. The Council had forced this choice through years of disrespect and exploitation. Now they would learn what the galaxy looked like without human participation. The door chimed and Linda entered without waiting for acknowledgement. She carried a bottle of whiskey that she had been saving for a special occasion. This seemed to qualify. Peter arrived moments later with 3 glasses. They poured in silence and raised their drinks. Jacob spoke a simple toast. To Earth and to choices made with clear eyes. They drank and began planning for the long journey ahead. The transport ships began arriving at Gamma Ceti, 3 days after Earth's withdrawal announcement. Lisa Monroe stood on the observation platform of the main fusion complex and watched the massive cargo haulers descend through the orange atmosphere. Each ship was large enough to carry entire city blocks worth of equipment, and they came in waves of 20 at a time. The operation was precise and methodical, planned down to the minute by logistics teams back on Earth. Every human facility in council space was being dismantled and brought home. Gamma Ceti had been Lisa's responsibility for 8 years. She had overseen the construction of 6 fusion plants that powered industrial operations across 3 star systems. The plants were marvels of human engineering, compact and efficient in ways that council technology could not match. Local alien workers operated the control systems, but the core technology was purely human. Now it was all coming down and going home. The council governor of Gamma Ceti appeared on her communication screen that afternoon. His species had blue skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. He was practically vibrating with panic. The fusion plants could not be removed. The sector depended on that power. Contracts were in place. Legal obligations existed. Lisa listened patiently until he finished. Then she transmitted the response that Earth had authorized for all colonial administrators. The plants were built by humans with human resources and human expertise. Earth owned them completely. Every component would be removed within the 90-day window. The governor threatened legal action through council courts. Lisa almost smiled at that. Earth no longer recognized council authority. Human lawyers had already reviewed every contract and agreement. The language was clear even if the council had never expected humans to actually enforce their rights. Everything humanity built in council space was being taken back. The governor's screen went dark as he cut the connection. Lisa turned back to watch the work crews beginning their careful disassembly of the first reactor core. The same scene played out on 40 human colonies scattered across council territory. Orbital stations powered down their systems and were towed away by human tugboats. Research facilities packed up decades of equipment and data. Trading posts closed their doors and evacuated their personnel. Mining operations in the Kepler expanse stripped every piece of movable machinery and abandoned the rest. The speed and efficiency shocked the council members who had assumed humans would negotiate, or at least delay. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the military aspects of Operation Homebound from her flagship, the Defiant. The Earth Defense Fleet had ships stationed throughout council space serving as escorts and peacekeepers. Every vessel received orders to return to human territory. The withdrawal had to be done carefully because the council fleet outnumbered human ships 3-1. Kate positioned her fastest cruisers along likely interception routes while the slower transports made their way home laden with people and equipment. The Galacxy Council convened emergency sessions daily, trying to understand what was happening. Chancellor Vormak attempted to open communication channels with Earth, but President Bennett's response was always the same. There would be no negotiations until Earth's withdrawal was complete and humanity's sovereignty was fully recognized. The Council had made their position clear through 15 years of condescending treatment. Now Earth was making their position equally clear. Some Council members began to panic as they realized the implications. Jothic called for immediate military action to seize human assets before they could be removed. He argued that Earth was stealing resources that belonged to the galactic community. Other representatives supported him, particularly species that had benefited most from access to human technology. But Vormak urged restraint. Military action against Earth would set a dangerous precedent and might cause other species to question their own council membership. The debate raged for weeks while human ships continued their steady exodus. On the industrial world of Tau Sigma, human engineers had maintained the jump gate network that connected 12 systems. When they prepared to leave, the local council administrator begged them to stay. Just a few more months to train replacements. The lead engineer, a woman named Karen White, shook her head. Earth had offered to train council personnel for years, but the requests were always denied or delayed. Now it was too late. The jump gates would have to be maintained by whoever the council could find. 2 weeks after Karen and her team departed, the Tau Sigma jump gate began experiencing malfunctions. Ships entering the gate arrived at their destinations several hours late. The precision timing that human engineers had maintained was degrading without their constant adjustments. The council rushed technicians to the site, but they lacked the deep understanding of human modifications to the system. What had worked flawlessly for a decade now became unpredictable and dangerous. Similar problems emerged across council space. Medical facilities that relied on human diagnostic equipment found themselves unable to maintain the machines properly. Agricultural colonies that used human soil treatment techniques watched their crop yields begin to fall. Transportation networks that depended on human logistics software started experiencing delays and inefficiencies. The Galacxy had become dependent on human expertise in countless small ways that nobody had bothered to track or appreciate. Lisa Monroe watched the last fusion reactor being loaded onto a transport ship. The work crews had been careful to remove every significant component. What remained was just the concrete housing and empty control rooms. Gamma Ceti would go dark the moment the last ship left orbit. She felt a twinge of sympathy for the people who would suffer without power. But Earth had offered partnership and been given subordination instead. The consequences of the Council's arrogance were not humanity's responsibility to fix. The colonial governor sent one final message as Lisa's shuttle prepared to depart. He offered a new contract with better terms. Earth could keep full ownership of the plants. There would be no council oversight. Please reconsider. Lisa deleted the message without responding. The time for better terms had passed. Earth was done begging for respect. On the edges of Council space, Admiral Sullivan received reports of Council ships moving into position along human evacuation routes. Her tactical officers analyzed the deployments and determined they were not yet aggressive, but they were clearly meant to intimidate. Kate ordered her fleet to maintain defensive formations but to avoid any provocative actions. The goal was to get everyone home safely. Fighting could come later if the Council was foolish enough to push for it. President Bennett addressed the people of Earth from the capital in New Geneva. Her speech was broadcast across all human colonies and ships. She acknowledged the sacrifices that withdrawal would require. Trade with Council species would end. Access to certain resources would be lost. Some luxuries would become unavailable. But freedom and dignity were worth more than comfortable arrangements built on inequality. Humanity would stand alone if necessary and build something better. The response from human populations was overwhelmingly supportive. People who had lived under Council jurisdiction for years spoke about the constant, subtle discrimination they faced. Human merchants described trade regulations that favored alien businesses. Human scientists talked about having their research appropriated by Council institutions. The stories poured in and painted a picture of systemic disrespect that most Earth citizens had not fully understood. The anger built and hardened into resolve. 3 months after the withdrawal announcement, the last human transport ship crossed from Council space into Earth territory. The Horizon's Edge was part of the final convoy, with Jacob Martinez standing on the bridge as they passed through the border zone. Sensors showed Council ships shadowing them but keeping their distance. No one fired. No one tried to stop the exodus. Earth had called the Council's bluff and won. Lisa Monroe arrived home to find her family waiting at the spaceport. Her children ran to embrace her while her partner held back tears of relief. She had been gone for 8 years, visiting Earth only occasionally. Now she was home for good. The reunion was sweet, but Lisa's mind was already thinking about the future. Earth would need to rebuild its infrastructure to handle the influx of returning colonists. New industries would need to be developed to replace what had been left behind. It would be hard work, but it would be work done on human terms. Admiral Sullivan positioned the defense fleet along the new borders of human space. Every strategic location bristled with weapon platforms and sensor arrays. If the Council wanted war, they would find humanity ready. But Kate hoped it would not come to that. Earth had made its point. Now it was time to see if the Galacxy had learned anything from watching humanity walk away with its head held high. The Galacxy Council chamber had never been so chaotic. Representatives shouted over each other while Chancellor Vormak tried desperately to restore order. 3 months had passed since Earth's withdrawal, and the consequences were cascading through Council space faster than anyone had predicted. Economic reports flashed across the central display, showing trade routes collapsing and production falling. 17 systems were experiencing food shortages. The Jump Gate network was operating at 60% efficiency. Medical facilities on frontier worlds were rationing supplies. A delegate from the Meridian cluster stood and demanded answers. Her people were starving because the agricultural techniques that humans had introduced were failing, without human supervision. Another representative from the industrial zones complained that manufacturing output had dropped by 40%. A third delegate pointed out that several minor species were openly questioning why they should remain in a council that could not even maintain basic services. The foundation of galactic order was cracking. Jothik listened to the complaints with growing fury. His wings buzzed constantly, a sign of extreme agitation. He had warned the council that humans were dangerous. He had said they should never have been allowed to integrate so deeply into galactic systems. Now his predictions were coming true, but he took no satisfaction in being right. The solution was obvious to him. Earth must be forced back into compliance through military action. A blockade would cut off human access to resources they needed. Economic pressure would bring them to the negotiating table within months. Vormak opposed the idea immediately. Military action against Earth would be seen as aggression by other council members. It might trigger the very fragmentation they were trying to prevent. Better to send diplomatic envoys and offer reasonable compromises. Earth had legitimate grievances that could be addressed through negotiation. But Jothik had the support of powerful hardline factions. They argued that showing weakness to Earth would encourage other species to make similar demands. The Council's authority had to be maintained. The debate stretched for hours until finally a vote was called. The authorization for a peacekeeping fleet passed by a narrow margin. 20 species would contribute ships to enforce a blockade of human space. The stated goal was to protect galactic stability and encourage Earth to return to diplomatic discussions. Jothik was given command of the operation. Formack registered his opposition in the official record, but could not stop the majority decision. President Claire Bennett received word of the Council's vote within hours. She immediately convened her Security Council in the Situation Room beneath the Capitol building. Admiral Kate Sullivan appeared via hologram from her flagship. Military analysts presented assessments of the Council fleet composition and likely strategies. The numbers were not favorable. 20 species meant hundreds of ships against Earth's defense fleet of less than 100. But Kate pointed out that the Council forces had never trained together and came from wildly different tactical traditions. Coordination would be their weakness. The blockade fleet assembled at the Arcturus relay station over the course of 2 weeks. Jothik positioned his forces in a wide formation designed to intercept any ships attempting to cross the border. His flagship was a massive dreadnought from his homeworld, bristling with plasma cannons and missile pods. The combined firepower of the fleet could reduce a planet to rubble. He broadcast a message toward human space demanding that Earth send representatives to discuss terms for ending the crisis. Admiral Sullivan moved the defense fleet to meet them. She positioned her ships in defensive formations around key entry points to human territory. Every vessel was on high alert with weapons ready but not armed. The orders were clear. Do not fire first, but be prepared to respond with overwhelming force if attacked. For 72 hours, both fleets faced each other across a few thousand kilometers of empty space. The tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. Dr. Henry Kim was not thinking about military standoffs as he prepared his ship for departure. The Newton's Legacy was a science vessel designed for research missions, not combat. His crew consisted of 12 scientists and engineers who specialized in biological research. They had received an urgent request from a colony outside Council space that was experiencing a plague outbreak. The colony had no political affiliation and desperately needed the medical supplies and expertise that Henry's team could provide. Politics should not prevent humanitarian missions. Henry filed his flight plan with Earth authorities and received clearance to depart. The route would take him close to the Arcturus relay where the blockade was positioned. He sent notification to both the Council fleet and Admiral Sullivan's forces explaining his peaceful medical mission. The Newton's Legacy was clearly marked with research insignia and medical symbols. No reasonable commander would interfere with a humanitarian vessel in neutral space. The science ship crossed into the disputed zone right on schedule. Henry maintained constant communication broadcasts announcing his peaceful intentions and medical cargo. His sensors picked up multiple Council ships adjusting their positions to intercept. Warning messages began flooding his communication channels, ordering him to change course. Henry consulted with his crew, and they voted unanimously to continue. The plague victims could not wait for politics to resolve itself. Jothik watched the human vessel approaching on his tactical display. His tactical officer reported that the ship was unarmed and clearly marked for scientific purposes. The flight plan and cargo manifest showed medical supplies bound for a neutral colony, but Jothik saw an opportunity. Earth needed to be shown that the Council was serious. One small ship refusing orders was the perfect excuse to demonstrate resolve. He ordered a warning shot fired across the Newton's bow. The plasma bolt streaked past Henry's ship close enough to rattle the hull plating. Alarms blared across the bridge, but Henry kept his course steady. He transmitted another message explaining his humanitarian mission and requesting safe passage. His communications officer suggested they should turn back. The political situation was clearly more volatile than they had anticipated. But Henry looked at the data on the plague spreading through the colony. Thousands of people would die without treatment. He could not turn back. Jothik's patience evaporated when the human ship continued forward. He gave the order to disable the vessel. A Council cruiser fired its main cannon at the Newton's engines. The shot was supposed to be precise and non-lethal, but space combat was never that clean. The blast tore through the engine section and sent the science ship tumbling. Emergency systems kicked in to prevent life support failure, but the Newton was dead in space, unable to maneuver or escape. The entire incident was broadcast in real time across multiple channels. Human ships recorded everything with high-resolution sensors. Council vessels had their own monitoring systems. Independent observers from neutral species watched with growing horror. The images were unmistakable. A clearly marked medical vessel flying in neutral space had been fired upon by a military fleet. The Newton's legacy drifted helplessly, its mission of mercy ended by violence. Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on every screen in the blockade fleet. Her voice was cold and precise as ice. She stated that Council forces had fired on an unarmed medical vessel in neutral territory, violating every principle of galactic law. The act would be remembered and judged by history. She gave Jathic one chance to withdraw his forces immediately. If the blockade remained, Earth would consider it an act of war and respond accordingly. The message ended and Sullivan waited for a response. Jathic felt the situation slipping from his control. His communications officer reported that several species in the blockade fleet were requesting clarification of orders. Some captains were expressing concerns about the legality of firing on a medical ship. Worse, messages were flooding in from across the galaxy condemning the attack. Even some council members were broadcasting their outrage. The demonstration of strength had backfired spectacularly. On Earth, President Bennett addressed the planet from the Capitol steps. Behind her, the Newton's legacy crew appeared in holographic projection, safe after being rescued by human ships. Claire spoke calmly about the attack and what it represented. The Council had revealed its true nature. Desperation had led them to violence against the innocent. Earth would not be intimidated by such tactics. The defense fleet would protect human space and human ships. Any further aggression would be met with appropriate force. The blockade fleet began to fracture within hours. 3 species announced they were withdrawing their ships, citing the illegal attack on the medical vessel. Others remained, but their captains sent private messages to Admiral Sullivan expressing their personal disagreement with Jathic's orders. The unified front that the Council had tried to project was crumbling. After 96 hours of standoff, Jathic received orders from the Council to withdraw. The blockade had failed before it truly began. The Newton's legacy was towed back to Earth orbit for repairs. Dr. Henry Kim and his crew received a hero's welcome despite their mission being interrupted. Henry felt frustrated that the medical supplies never reached the plague victims, but President Bennett assured him that another ship would complete the delivery under heavy escort. The galaxy needed to see that Earth would not abandon humanitarian principles even under threat of violence. The incident had cost the Council more than they could have imagined. The transport ship arrived at Earth under cover of diplomatic immunity. Ambassador Velthar stepped onto the landing pad in New Geneva and felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. She was a Crethan, a species of tall avian creatures with silver feathers and keen intelligence. For 20 years she had served the Galaxy Council faithfully. Now she was abandoning everything she had known to seek asylum with humanity. The choice had been difficult, but watching the Council fire on a medical vessel had made it necessary. President Claire Bennett met Velthar in a private conference room without media or fanfare. The Crethan ambassador carried data chips containing classified Council information. She explained that she was not the only one having doubts. At least 16 species within the Council were quietly questioning the leadership. The attack on the Newton's legacy had shocked many representatives, who still believed the Council stood for civilized values. Moderate voices were being drowned out by hardliners like Jathic, who saw any compromise as weakness. Claire listened carefully as Velthar described the internal fractures within the Council. Several species were economically devastated by Earth's withdrawal. Others feared that military confrontation would escalate into full-scale war. A few forward-thinking leaders recognized that the old hierarchical system was unsustainable. They saw what Earth was doing and wondered if their own species might benefit from similar independence. The Council was holding together through momentum and fear, but the foundation was cracking. Velthar offered Earth something more valuable than intelligence. She proposed that humanity begin forming direct bilateral agreements with sympathetic Council species, trade deals that bypassed Council oversight, defense pacts that did not require Council approval, cultural exchanges that happened between equals rather than through bureaucratic channels. The goal was not to destroy the Council, but to show that alternatives existed. If enough species started making independent agreements, the Council's monopoly on galactic cooperation would end. The proposal excited Claire but also worried her. Earth had just escaped one entangling alliance. Building new relationships required careful thought. She called in her advisors and diplomats to evaluate the opportunity. After 3 days of discussions, Earth made its decision. Humanity would reach out to Velthar's contacts and propose a new framework for galactic cooperation. Not a federation with central authority, but a network of partnerships between sovereign equals. The first agreement was signed with the Crethans 2 weeks later. Trade in medical technology and rare metals would flow between Earth and the Crethan homeworld, without council tariffs or regulations. Human doctors would help train Crethan medical students. Crethan artists would perform on Earth. The agreement was simple and direct, covering only areas of mutual interest. Neither species surrendered any sovereignty or accepted any binding obligations beyond what they explicitly agreed to. News of the Earth-Crethan agreement spread quickly. Within a month, 3 more species approached Earth with similar proposals. The Nalfari, an aquatic species known for their environmental science, wanted to share research on terraforming techniques. The Vorath, silicon-based lifeforms from high-gravity worlds, needed human engineering expertise for their mining operations. The Tessic, insectoid traders, saw opportunities for profit in human consumer goods. Each agreement was negotiated separately with terms that reflected the specific needs and interests of both parties. Commander Nina Foster oversaw the construction of Liberty Point Station in orbit around Earth's moon. The facility was designed as a meeting place for the new partnerships. Unlike council stations with their rigid protocols and hierarchies, Liberty Point was open and flexible. Research labs shared space with cultural centers. Trading floors operated alongside diplomatic conference rooms. The architecture itself made a statement about equality, with no species given better quarters or more prominent locations. The first joint research project at Liberty Point brought together human and Crethan scientists working on faster-than-light communication. For decades, the Council had controlled the quantum relay network that allowed instant messaging across the galaxy. The technology was old and inefficient, but the Council refused to allow improvements that might threaten their monopoly. Nina watched as researchers from both species tackled the problem with fresh approaches. Within 3 months, they achieved a breakthrough that doubled transmission speed while cutting power requirements in half. The new communication system was shared freely among all of Earth's partners. No patents were filed. No licenses were required. The technology spread rapidly, and suddenly dozens of species had access to better communications without relying on Council infrastructure. The political implications were enormous. Species that had been forced to route all their messages through Council relays could now talk directly to each other. The Council's ability to monitor and control information flow was diminishing. Jothik watched Earth's alliance network growing with increasing alarm. He proposed a covert operation to sabotage the new communication relays. When that idea faced too much opposition, he suggested a Black Ops mission to destroy Earth's primary shipyard at the Mars Orbital Complex. The shipyard was producing new vessels at an impressive rate, strengthening Earth's military position. Removing it would set humanity back years and show other species the cost of defying the Council. The mission was approved quietly by a small group of hardliners without full Council knowledge. A strike team was assembled from species known for their stealth capabilities. The plan was to infiltrate the shipyard during a scheduled maintenance window and plant explosives that would appear to be an industrial accident. The team launched toward Sol System with encrypted orders and advanced cloaking technology. What Jothik did not know was that Velthar had contacts throughout Council intelligence services. One of those contacts, a cryptographer named Torval, sent warning to Earth as soon as he decoded the mission parameters. The message reached Admiral Kate Sullivan 48 hours before the strike team was scheduled to arrive. Kate immediately deployed her best ships to intercept. The Council operatives never reached Mars. Human vessels dropped out of quantum drive directly in their path near Jupiter's orbit. The strike team found themselves surrounded and outgunned. Their leader, realizing the mission was compromised, ordered his ships to surrender rather than fight a battle they could not win. Kate's crews boarded the Council vessels and took the operatives into custody without firing a shot. The interrogations revealed everything. The operatives carried orders signed by Jothik himself, authorizing the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Communication logs showed coordination with other Council hardliners. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Earth had proof that Council leadership had ordered a terrorist attack against human civilians. Claire Bennett made the decision to release everything publicly. The scandal exploded across the galaxy. News networks from hundreds of species broadcast the intercepted orders and confessions. Images of the captured strike team appeared on every screen. The evidence was undeniable and shocking. The Galaxy Council, supposedly the guardian of civilized behavior and galactic law, had authorized a covert attack on civilian targets. Species that had trusted council leadership felt betrayed. Even loyal council members could not defend such actions. Chancellor Vormak called an emergency session and demanded answers. Drothik tried to justify the operation as necessary to protect galactic security. He argued that Earth had become a threat that required extreme measures. But his words fell on deaf ears. Representatives from moderate species called for his immediate removal. Some demanded criminal prosecution. The chamber that had once supported hardline policies against Earth now turned on its most vocal advocate. Vormak resigned 3 days later. In his final speech to the council, he spoke about failure and regret. The council had lost its way by prioritizing control over cooperation. Earth had shown them a mirror and the reflection was ugly. He hoped that new leadership might find a path to redemption, but he could not in good conscience remain part of an institution that had fallen so far from its founding principles. His resignation shook the council to its core. Species began withdrawing from the council in increasing numbers. Some joined Earth's alliance network immediately. Others declared neutrality and independence. A few tried to form their own regional coalitions. The exodus was not orderly or organized, but it was relentless. Within 2 months, the council had lost nearly a third of its member species. The institution that had governed galactic affairs for centuries was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. On Liberty Point, Nina Foster watched new ships arriving daily. Each one carried diplomats or traders or scientists from species seeking partnership with Earth. The small conference rooms were booked solid for months. Human diplomats worked overtime to negotiate agreements and establish frameworks. The work was exhausting but also exhilarating. Something new was being built from the ruins of the old system. Belthar stood beside Nina on the observation deck and watched a Nalfari vessel dock. She had given up everything to make this possible. Her position, her status, her entire life within the council structure was gone. But watching the new alliances forming, seeing species cooperate as equals, she felt no regret. The galaxy was changing and she had helped push it in the right direction. Earth had shown everyone that there was an alternative to the council's hierarchy. Now dozens of species were choosing freedom over security and building something better together. 1 year had passed since Earth walked away from the Galaxy Council, and the galaxy looked fundamentally different. President Claire Bennett stood in the assembly hall built on the lunar surface and watched representatives from 60 species take their seats. The hall was circular with no elevated positions or hierarchies. Every delegation sat at the same level because every species was equal. This was the first formal gathering of what they were calling the Free Worlds Assembly. The name had been chosen carefully after months of discussion. It was not a federation or a council or an empire. It was an assembly where free worlds came together by choice. There was no central government. No species surrendered sovereignty. No binding laws applied unless a species specifically agreed to them. The whole structure was built on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. It was messy and complicated, but it was also genuinely democratic in a way the old council had never been. Claire opened the gathering with a short speech. She talked about the journey that brought them all here. Earth had not wanted to leave the council but had been forced to choose between dignity and membership. That choice had revealed something important. Many species felt trapped in a system that did not serve them. The council had promised stability and protection, but delivered bureaucracy and exploitation. Now there was an alternative. Species could work together without surrendering their freedom. The response from the assembled delegates was enthusiastic. A Cretan representative spoke about how trade with Earth had revitalized their economy. An Alfari scientist described collaborative research projects that would have taken decades under council regulations. A Vorath mining executive praised the efficiency of direct negotiations without layers of bureaucratic approval. Story after story painted the same picture. Working as equals produced better results than the old hierarchical system. Not everyone in the galaxy was happy with the changes. The remaining council members, about 150 species, still met in their grand chamber on Valera Prime. They had elected new leadership after the scandals, but the institution was a shadow of its former self. The council controlled far less territory and had minimal influence over galactic affairs. Some member species stayed out of loyalty. Others remained because they benefited from the old power structures. But the council's days of dominance were clearly over. The council made one final attempt to reassert its authority. The new security director, a cautious bureaucrat named Kelvan, proposed a military expedition to reclaim contested territories. If the council could demonstrate strength, perhaps wavering species would return to the fold. Jothic, though stripped of official power, lobbied behind the scenes for aggressive action. He had never forgiven Earth for humiliating him and saw one last chance for revenge. The council fleet, assembled near the Rigel sector where several former member species had formed close partnerships with Earth. Kelvan commanded 200 ships drawn from loyalist species. The plan was to establish a military presence and demand that local governments acknowledge council sovereignty. It was meant to be a show of force rather than actual combat. Kelvan hoped that an overwhelming display of strength would make fighting unnecessary. Admiral Kate Sullivan received intelligence about the council fleet movements from multiple sources. Earth's network of alliances included species with excellent reconnaissance capabilities. Kate knew about the fleet composition and objectives before Kelvan's ships even left council space. She immediately contacted the governments in the Rigel sector and offered Earth support. Every single one accepted the offer within hours. The response fleet that assembled to meet the council force was unlike anything the Galacxy had seen before. Ships from 20 different species gathered under their own flags. There was no unified command structure. Instead, Earth shared tactical data through the advanced communication network developed at Liberty Point. Each species coordinated with others but maintained independent control of their vessels. It was organized chaos, but it worked because everyone shared the same goal of protecting their mutual independence. Kelvan emerged from Quantum, drive in the Rigel sector expecting to intimidate a few poorly defended colonies. Instead, his sensors showed a combined fleet that outnumbered his forces nearly 2-1. Human cruisers formed the backbone of the defensive line. Krathan fast attack ships provided scouting and flanking capabilities. Vorath heavy vessels brought massive firepower. Nalfari support ships could repair damage and resupply ammunition. The Free Worlds Assembly had created an ad hoc military force that was larger and more capable than the Council fleet. The standoff lasted only a few hours. Kelvan consulted with his staff and reviewed their tactical options. Every simulation showed that attacking would result in massive casualties on both sides. Even if the Council won, the victory would be Pyrrhic. The political cost of starting a major war would destroy what little credibility the Council retained. Kelvan made the only rational choice and ordered his fleet to withdraw. The Council's final bid to reclaim power ended without a shot being fired. The retreat shattered what remained of Council prestige. Within weeks, 20 more species announced their withdrawal from the dying institution. Some joined the Free Worlds Assembly. Others chose to remain independent but friendly. A few formed their own regional associations. The important thing was that species were making their own choices rather than accepting decisions imposed from above. The old order was gone and something new was emerging from its ruins. Jothic watched the final collapse from his home world. He had been recalled and stripped of all authority after the sabotage scandal. His own government, embarrassed by his actions, removed him from public life. He spent his days reviewing what had gone wrong. Earth should have been easy to control. Humans were newcomers with limited resources and influence. How had they managed to topple an institution that had stood for centuries? The answer eluded him because he could not accept the simple truth. The Council had destroyed itself through arrogance and disrespect. On Earth, Commander Jacob Martinez received a promotion to ambassador and was assigned to oversee diplomatic operations from the new flagship Unity. The ship was specifically designed for his role, combining diplomatic facilities with defensive capabilities. Jacob would travel between Free Worlds Assembly members helping to negotiate agreements and resolve disputes. It was exactly the kind of work he had hoped to do within the Council, before that institution proved unworthy of the trust. Linda Hayes joined Jacob's team as his chief advisor. She had spent the past year helping to draft the framework documents that defined how the Assembly operated. The rules were simple and flexible. Species could join by agreeing to a few basic principles like respecting sovereignty, and resolving disputes peacefully. Beyond that, everything was voluntary. If a species wanted to participate in joint defense arrangements, they could. If they preferred to focus on trade or cultural exchange, that was equally valid. The system worked because it did not try to force everyone into the same mold. Peter Graham took command of the security detail protecting Earth's growing network of diplomatic stations. His job was to ensure that meetings happened safely without turning facilities into armed fortresses. It required a careful balance between vigilance and openness. Peter developed protocols that other species adopted for their own diplomatic security. The work was challenging but rewarding in ways that peacekeeping missions for the Council had never been. The construction of Nexus Station began in neutral space equidistant from the three largest assembly members. The station would be enormous, capable of hosting thousands of diplomats, traders, and visitors simultaneously. Unlike Council stations with their restricted areas and clearance levels, Nexus was designed to be open and accessible. Any species could dock. Any individual could visit public areas. The station would be a physical representation of the Assembly's values: transparency, equality, and cooperation. Jacob stood on the bridge of the Unity and watched the early construction of Nexus through the viewport. Massive cargo ships delivered building materials from a dozen different worlds. Work crews from half a dozen species coordinated their efforts despite language and cultural differences. It was beautiful in its own way. All these different beings working toward a common goal without anyone forcing them to participate. This was what galactic civilization should look like. Linda joined him at the viewport with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jacob and they stood in comfortable silence watching the construction. After a while, Linda spoke quietly. She said that a year ago they had been scared when they walked out of the council chamber. Nobody knew if Earth's gamble would work or if humanity would end up isolated and vulnerable. Now look at what they had built together. Not just humans, but dozens of species working as partners. Jacob nodded and thought about the journey. Earth had not set out to destroy the Galaxy Council or reshape galactic civilization. They had simply refused to accept being treated as inferior. That one act of self-respect had inspired others to question the system they lived under. The Council had survived for centuries by convincing species that the alternative to hierarchy was chaos. Earth proved them wrong by demonstrating that equals could cooperate effectively. New ships arrived at the construction site daily. Some brought materials and workers. Others carried diplomats hoping to join the assembly or establish trade agreements. A few were just curious visitors wanting to see the new order being built. Jacob greeted many of them personally and heard their stories. Species that had been marginalized under council rule now had voices. Colonies that had struggled under restrictive regulations were thriving with new freedom. It was not perfect, and there were still problems to solve, but the trajectory was positive. The council still existed in diminished form. About 80 species remained as members, mostly those who had benefited most from the old hierarchies. They would probably continue meeting and passing resolutions that fewer and fewer worlds cared about. Jacob felt no animosity toward them. The council had served a purpose once but had outlived its usefulness. What replaced it was better because it was built on mutual respect, rather than imposed authority. President Bennett sent a message to Jacob asking him to represent Earth at the official opening of Nexus Station scheduled for 6 months in the future. The ceremony would include representatives from every assembly member and many neutral species. It would be a celebration of what free worlds could accomplish together. Jacob accepted the honor knowing that the real work would continue long after the ceremony ended. Building a better galaxy was not a project with a finish line, but an ongoing commitment. As the Unity prepared to depart for its next diplomatic mission, Jacob took one last look at Nexus Station. The framework was taking shape against the backdrop of stars. In a year it had grown from an idea to a physical reality. In another year it would be complete and functioning. The station would stand as proof that Earth's decision to cut ties with the Council had not been reckless or selfish, but necessary and ultimately beneficial for everyone who valued freedom. The galaxy had been in panic when Earth left. Now it was full of possibility,